and stop sharing my screen. And Brian, feel free to go ahead and share yours. And I can read your session description while that's happening.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. All right, so next up we have Brian Zelip, the front-end developer for ArchivesSpace. He's presenting Modernizing the ArchivesSpace Codebase. This lightning talk provides a high-level technical overview of recent and ongoing upgrades to ArchivesSpace that improve security, performance, and other modernization efforts. So Brian, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks very much. You can hear me, I assume, yeah?
Yep, I can hear you and see your slides. Right now they're up in presenter mode, so if you have any notes, we'll also be able to see those.
Okay. I don't even want to be in this, but let's just do that. Yeah, so hi everyone. I'm Brian Zelip, and I've been working on the team officially for the past almost 2 years and did some contracting work before that for a few years as well. So I've had a chance to grow with the application and really see quite the breadth of it, of the code base, which is pretty big as an application goes. And recently we've been doing some work that's done some really new useful additions and changes to the code base. Some of the stuff, a lot of the stuff actually is almost unnoticeable visually from a user's perspective. It looks the same, but some of the changes include the functionality changes. There'll be some improvements in just kind of the usability of it. And there's some other sort of security things that have been changing too. And so just as a high level overview, one of the big things that have changed for folks who may have heard of some of these things, or folks who represent staff who are hosting ArchivesSpace at their institution, some major upgrades have happened that have been needed for a long time and sort of a long time coming. And these changes actually aren't yet in a released version. These changes will be coming in the next release. We just are on the heels of version 3.5, which has been released as a release candidate. So that's almost out. And it's up there for people to play around with and check out and test. The next version that comes out after that is going to include these really big monumental changes that we see here. Starting with Ruby on Rails, which is sort of the underlying templating engine that the server sends when the server sends HTML down to either a staff user who's using the staff backend, or an archive patron who's using the public front end. This is what is doing most of that heavy lifting. And from 5.2 to 6.1 doesn't sound too much, mathematically speaking, but this represents some significant changes to some security patches, as well as some performance increases and improvements, and all around better development experience too, for those people who maintain plugins for ArchivesSpace, and people who, in the open source community may fix some bugs, and for our development team as well, of course. Another one is this big one, this jQuery. This is actually the major one from my perspective, because this is really old, 1.12. And this again is only a couple of different points mathematically, but major upgrades, and especially in a lot of there's some security patches that they haven't really they've alerted the institutions that host ArchivesSpace, and made them worried that it's such old versions of these libraries that are being used. And it's true that some of these older versions, and software has bugs, but not all bugs represent problems because of the ways that applications are used. However, this has been a multi-year need, 6-7 years plus, that this has sort of been an issue. And this is finally coming down the pipe on the next archive release. And this has some kind of edge case security improvements, but a whole lot of changes to the developer experience, particularly, and other kind of things. And finally, one of the things that's also changing is sort of the paint on ArchivesSpace. Bootstrap, which is the CSS styling library, the system that is sort of the de facto design system that ArchivesSpace is kind of built on visually, and in some cases, behaviorally. Um, and this is big. One of the really big improvements here, again, not that big of a difference mathematically, but uh, at Bootstrap 3.3, it was a much more immature library, especially accessibility wise. So one of the things that we're getting now, coming the next release, is a bunch of new sort of newfound strength in accessibility throughout the application, just sort of by doing these upgrades of upgrading the library and adjusting the markup accordingly to use the new way that you use the library, because there's been some changes from this version to this version. So this has actually been these two things in particular. I mean, actually, this whole dependency upgrade project has been over 3 years in the making. I think, if I recall correctly, this work was ArchivesSpace was working with a contractor in 2001, sort of around this time, 2001, and within the last 6 months, it was handed off from them to the ArchivesSpace team, and we have been running the extra mile to close that final 20% that they got it to. They got it kind of the 80% of the way, and we've been crossing all the T's and dotting all the I's, and that's what we're getting ready for next year. So this is for next release. So this has been a long time coming, and that's a long time, and that kind of gives you an idea of the challenge of ArchivesSpace development, its breadth, and when you combine that with its age and the fact that being an open source project in the academic community, where funding is sometimes a concern and a question, there's not always as detailed a handoff from developer to developer. It's getting developed over time by different groups of people who may or may not be in communication with each other. And that proves to be difficult, especially when you have something as large as ArchivesSpace, which is kind of one thing in one sense, but it's also kind of 4 different things in another sense, 4 different applications too. So anyway, this work has been a long time coming, and it's coming down the pipe in the next release. And just to maybe kind of show you some stuff here, where is it? Oops, sorry. So again, a lot of this work doesn't look a lot different, right? But already we can see here's the new version. And if I just go over here to the test version, already we'll see I'm already bumped up, and so this is the default way that it currently looks, the application. This is the new one that's kind of coming down the pipe. We're already getting a little bit a bump up in text. We're starting to get some more accessible color contrast. That's another big thing that I love working in this new code base. It just looks crisper, and it's more, there's more color contrast. More of the WCAG accessibility guidelines are being met across the board now. It didn't just happen as a result of changing Bootstrap, for example. We've been doing a lot of work in doing this long tail of issues that ArchivesSpace has had for some time now. And that's all coming to a head here very soon. One of the other things, in addition to those library upgrades that we've been doing, our dependency upgrades, we've also been changing sort of rewriting underneath the hood the way that ArchivesSpace utilizes the browser's capabilities. And ArchivesSpace has had a challenge of, has had a technical challenge for a long time in trying to create the application that it is, namely, especially something like the good old Krispy Kreme, like the public interfaces collection organization, which is another word for like an infinite scroll. So this is something that changed, is part of the upgrades, I believe, in version 3.5. I think that's when this new thing is coming. And this looks pretty much identical to what it used to look like before version 3.5. But under the hood, it's utilizing the browser in a way that the original ArchivesSpace could not have done when this was written, the collection organization was written, because the browser didn't have these kind of native capabilities that I have now been able to leverage. So one of the persnickety things about the collection organization, especially for users, because this is on the public interface, is, we would scroll down and this would be moving, this sidebar would be expanding as you would scroll into new records here. This would be sort of in sync with this, and there would be a lot of activity going on. And this data, this is like an infinite scroll, which is essentially like a Twitter feed or a Pinterest feed, where you just keep scrolling down and more information gets loaded to the browser from the server as the user scrolls towards the bottom of the content that already has been downloaded. So it's this constant communication back and forth with the server, sending, potentially a lot of information. And so that can generally be slow, on bad internet, on spotty internet, etc. And this whole situation was often very awkward. And I understand how it was written, what was written before this new iteration, and my hat is off to the collective authors who created that, because they were fighting against a grain that something wasn't really created to do what it does. And ArchivesSpace is its infinite scroll in this collection organization is more challenging than a Twitter or a Pinterest infinite scroll, because Twitter and Pinterest only go one direction. They only scroll down. And so you always kind of know where you're at and what's coming next. But here you can, when we, I'll just refresh this page again. When we come to this page for the first time, because there's a table of contents, a user could go somewhere way down deep in the collection, and then you suddenly you've sort of entered into it, not from the top, you've entered into it deep into the middle, and now you have potentially infinite stuff below you and potentially infinite stuff sort of above you. Not obviously infinite, it's all finite ultimately, but you get the idea. And my hats go off also to Brigham Young University, who helped by sharing some of their database with us and they had data with very many amount of children, archival objects of a resource that I used to really beat up the code and find all kinds of problems with where it was at, and use their big data to iron out a solution that really works across the board for everybody, in a way that meets the write-ups about these problems in our JIRA, in our tickets, in the way that ArchivesSpace and the technical committees and the dev prioritization committees, how we have our JIRA workflow for bug reports and feature requests. This new work has been a rewriting of an old way, sort of a new plumbing that does the same thing, but makes a few changes, like the sidebar is not in sync with this anymore for that jarring constant motion, and a few other things. And again, this work was made possible because the evolution of browser functionality has increased over time, and in the past few years has had significant improvements. And we are working on incorporating as much of the platform to do the heavy lifting as possible. And we're reversing the reliance on JavaScript heaviness. We're still going to be relying on JavaScript to do a lot of things in ArchivesSpace, but we are relegating some of the work that previous code authors had to use JavaScript for. Now we are relegating that work to the browser, which is a win-win for everybody, accessibility-wise, performance-wise, device age and capability-wise, etc. And battery-wise, even is another big thing. So those are kind of some of the improvements that have been going on and that are coming down the pipe, and they kind of follow suit with where we're headed and what we're thinking about as a development team, and particularly plans that we have for future work after even this next release is out of the way. And I think that can be about my time. If there's any questions, look.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I
Here,
see some questions about exactly. I
yeah,
know.
Brian.
In other words, yeah, go ahead.
If you can let me read the questions out loud for the
Sorry,
people that are
gotcha.
listening. Yeah, yeah. No, I know. Yeah, but yeah, so there's lots of comments in the chat where people are very excited by this. So I think that that's cool. Kevin Clare is unreasonably excited, but I'll leave that where it is. So we do have a question though. The first question is wondering why Bootstrap 4 instead of 5, just timing in the development pipeline.
Yes, because like I said, this was handed off to us. This was handed because timing, because this work started in 2001. Bootstrap 5 wasn't out in 2001. And so the consulting firm that did the initial heavy lifting of that sort of initial 80%, that's where the world was at that time. And so that's the same reason for everything, including jQuery, and Ruby on Rails as well. And it's particularly unfortunate in Bootstrap because it was so close. It was comparable, but I understand why. There was big API changes from Bootstrap 3 to 4, and that's what I'm going through. Kind of pulling my hair out, these very minute details all throughout the apps. And so there would even be a continuation. They already started that work, and then to go to 5. So that's just the way the cookie crumbles. But we're in definitely a better situation going forward. And just to put it out there, one of the things that ArchivesSpace doesn't really have is something that more modern workflows and teams employ these days is something called like a design system. That's really sort of a reference document. It's a kind of a living documentation for the components that make up your user interface. And that there's no real style guide to that kind of a thing in ArchivesSpace. You just kind of look at other examples of it. And so there's a lot of drift all over the app, and there's many templates. Our developer Don just did some math, and there's something like a few 100,000 lines of code in this application. So anyway, that's the reason why. And I've got ideas. I'm sort of itching to do next upgrades, but of course we have a lot of other tickets. I mean, these tickets in themselves float many boats. They solve many issues by doing these upgrades. But as you see, these upgrades like this also take a serious amount of time. So we won't be doing any kind of heavy lifting like this again soon. But I certainly have ideas for the next time, and we've already been baking in best practices that'll help speed that process up come next time.
Thanks, Brian. Yeah, so we do have another comment from Joshua Shaw. But I just really quickly want to point out a couple of times you said that the contractor work started in 2001. It's 2021. So move slow, but not that slow.
Sorry.
So yeah, no.
Whoa. Yeah, sorry
Yeah.
about that.
Then Joshua says, going off the design guideline idea, any plans for a UX review and changes to the UI, especially thinking of the staff search view and tables? That was Joshua's.
Got it. I think that's a great idea. I'm sure there's definitely a lot of tickets floating around that deal with different parts of that elephant. I'm not sure if there's a centralized ticket that really takes an in-depth look and starts some in-depth planning. Um, you know that would be a function of a lot of the dev pri and sort of feature request writing processes of